Well, hot diggity dog, we made it to week 6, and we're going to talk about our not-self today. Yay! And so, as always, we want to get in the habit of when we start with a little meditation, and so just sort of find that place where you're comfortable. You want to shake it out a little bit if you need to. If you feel any sense of stress, tension in your neck or shoulders, just imagine that melts away. And as always, I'll begin by ringing the bell 3 times. And we can use the sound and vibration of the bell to bring us more fully present into this room, into our body, and into this present moment. And on your refuge vows sheet, you'll see the refuge prayer, and if you'd like to say it out loud with me. In Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, we go for refuge until fully awakened through the power of generosity, ethics, patience, enthusiastic effort, concentration, and wisdom. For the sake of all beings, may we realize and demonstrate our innate goodness. In Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, we go for refuge until fully awakened through the power of generosity, ethics, patience, enthusiastic effort, concentration, and wisdom. For the sake of all beings, may we realize and demonstrate our innate goodness. In Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, we go for refuge until fully awakened through the power of generosity, ethics, patience, enthusiastic effort, concentration, and wisdom. For the sake of all beings, may we realize and demonstrate our innate goodness. And as we prepare for the meditation, do a short chant that's very straightforward and easy to follow along. As we've talked about, one of the main Buddhist chants is Om Mani Padme Hum, which is translated as the jewel is in the lotus. But it's a reminder for us to remember that innate compassion and innate wisdom that is within each and every one of us that we can tap into. So we'll just very slowly chant Om Mani Padme Hum. So just follow along with me, and we'll join our voices together to be more deeply connected. Om Mani Padme Ah allowing the breath to find its natural rhythm. We can pull our awareness down from our head, focusing instead on the heart area. Paying close attention to the experience of breathing in and breathing out. There'll be these exact moments when you realize you've been distracted. And that exact moment of realization can be celebrated, because that is a moment of being present. And then we just return our focus again and again, as many times as needed, returning attention to the sensation of breathing in and breathing out. So tonight, we're going to talk about one of the more complicated ideas in Buddhism, and there's a lot of misunderstandings about it. And it's understandable because, once again, somebody said something 2,500 years ago, and then 300 or 400 years later, people started writing down, trying to remember what was said. And then people added a little bit here and a little bit there, and shifted a little bit, and then took stuff away. And so we're doing our best to kind of put it all back together and say, what was this amazing experience that somebody had 2,500 years ago that we could also have? And what would we need to do, or to think, or to say in order to create fertile ground for us to have an awakening in our lives? And so one of the concepts that is often talked about in Buddhism is anatta, which is no self. There's said to be 3 marks of existence that are specific to Buddhism: anatta, anicca, and dukkha. So we've talked about dukkha, this idea of suffering or dissatisfaction. We've talked about anicca, which is impermanence, that all conditioned things ultimately come apart. Anything that comes together will ultimately fall away. We're all just basically stardust that's been rearranging itself for several millions of years. And so these 3 ideas, anatta, anicca, and dukkha, are helpful to understand in that to look at it not as an absolute. And this is one of the things in Buddhism that is, for me, the most powerful part of this practice. That nothing is absolute. That we have to be fully present in the moment to be able to know what will create the most good and relieve the most suffering. So this idea of anatta, no self, it turns out that Buddha didn't say that. And I think I've said 14 questions that people asked the Buddha, and he never answered. And he did it very strategically because he believed that there were certain questions that did not help us awaken. And so in our Judeo-Christian upbringing, which most of us come from, we are used to thinking about beliefs more than behavior. And so, I don't know about you, when I was growing up in the Methodist Church, we talked a lot about what happens after you die. We talked a lot about heaven and hell and being a good person and somebody's watching over you, and even if there was nobody there, God was there with his binoculars, making sure that you were doing absolutely the right thing. He kind of sounded like a real creepy Santa Claus to me. So I've always struggled with this word God. But in this concept, something is missing, and that is we will never know what happens after we die until it's too late to report. And so the Buddha was saying that who knows? What are you doing in this moment to create the greatest good and relieve the most suffering? And so that is the thing that we should focus on. So people would ask him, is there a self? Is there not a self? And he actually, that's one of the other questions that he would not answer. It wasn't helpful to awakening to try to find the perfect answer of whether there is a soul or a self or something of us that continues on after we die. Once again, we won't know for sure until it's too late. But you can understand where there might have been a little misunderstanding, because in the sutras, and I quote specifically this wonderful American monk named Tanasato Bhikkhu, who did a scholarly essay on this exact subject, and he read the Pali Canon from front to back and culled it down to the essence of what was being said. And so there is this part about not self. And not self is said to be one of the 7 beneficial perceptions. And so a perception is something, kind of how you experience yourself vis-a-vis the world. In Buddhism, when we talk about our self, in air quotes, there's the 5 aggregates. Like we're sitting here, or it feels like somebody's sitting here, doesn't it? And so you feel like you have a body. I'm touching something. And then there's sensations. And so in this moment, you're having sensations in your body, or in this thing that we call a body. Or it certainly feels like there's sensations happening in this thing we call a body. And there's also perceptions. So from a very young age, we are encouraged through the use of language to label everything. Something is round and we're taught that that's a ball. Something is like that and we're told that it's a window. Something that we sit in, we're told is a chair. And so we have these perceptions, these ways that we categorize everything in our life. And then we pile in on top of that the judgments, the opinions, the preconceived notions that we have. And so there's something that seems like that's us. If you were to go to a party and somebody would say, tell me a little bit about yourself, what would you say? You might talk about your past or your current situation, what job you have, what kind of a car you drive, or who you're in a relationship with. And so we have all these points of relativity that we're using to create a sense of self. I am not you, you are not me, and I feel so strongly about that. And I have judgments about who I am in comparison to you. We have judgments that we're not pretty enough, we're not handsome enough, we don't make enough money. The bane of our existence is Facebook, where everybody always puts all the lovely things that are happening in their life. And so rarely, if we're having a bad day, do we just simply want to tell the world. And so everyone is comparing their life to our Facebook life, which is suddenly this whole new construct of what we want others to think of us. We want to be funny, witty, go to great parties, take selfies. And so this Facebook self is something we are constructing out of these words that we put into a machine. But I don't quite think that's who you are. And then there's a sense of consciousness, the 5th aggregate of this sort of sense that there's something happening here in this space that sort of feels like, well, indescribable. Of all the labels I know, it sort of feels like I'm alive in this moment. Does everybody sort of feel alive? And then what does alive feel like? How do you know you're alive? And so we come up with these aggregates of things that we sort of piece together. And suddenly it solidifies and hardens and feels like that's who we are. And so when the Buddha was talking about this beneficial perception of not self, he's encouraging us to kind of let go of that stuff that doesn't really matter. The way we compare ourselves to others, the way we judge ourselves, the opinions that we hold so firmly that we are sure that we are right, the baggage of our past experiences that we carry around with us like this heavy weight. And so what would it feel like to have a perception of not self? this ability to feel more fluid and flexible and curious. Like, what the heck is going on here? And so we can start to playfully play with this idea of who or what we think we are. And so when we look at the not self-perception, maybe you can start to get a visceral feel of how that can be liberating. What if you don't have to be the sum of your past experiences? What if it doesn't matter how you measure up to any other person? What if you just are in this moment, open and curious and awake to the possibilities? Ever remember, like on Christmas morning, this would be the Santa Claus talk. Santa Claus was going to come, and you had that where you could barely stay in bed, and you wanted to jump up and go to the tree and find out what Santa Claus had left you that day. So imagine that kind of excitement that we could create about every day. What is this? What might it be? And so we can start to look at some of the judgments that we have that are no longer serving us. And that part of this is that you have to give up that which you think you are to have the experience of just being. And it's powerful, but it is not so easy to do. And I use this simple example of this dang word, God. I hate that word. Some people love that word. I have a judgment based on past experiences. When somebody says the word God to me, I have a judgment. And when I say the word God to someone else, hell, I don't know what they're thinking. Those are the judgments that may be holding us back. On Sunday, I told the story of getting such a precious opportunity to go talk to Father Thomas Keating. Just him, my Buddhist teacher, and me in a room. I'm talking to a guy who's 90 years old, this was 2 years ago, who's been a monk for 70 years. He ought to know a thing about God. And he tells me, I didn't even get to ask the question, which to me is most surprising. He just simply blurts out that God is a nickname, a placeholder for that which is indescribable. And so here I'd gotten so caught up in my shorts about this word God and what people had told me and what I was supposed to believe. And somebody who had studied God for 70 years was able to put it in perspective for me in less than 90 seconds. And so what other judgments am I holding on to that are not serving me? That are causing me to get hung up on what I think I know and what I think is right? We have some crazy ideas in our head, and we often live our life by them. And so it's an opportunity in teasing apart this idea of not self, that just sort of fall into it, explore the possibility that you are just energy, being in this moment, that you are not that which you are hanging on to. And the hanging on is happening through simply a thought in your head. And so that we can shift the way we are experiencing ourselves and the world around us by having a different thought. And so I think this is pretty powerful. And maybe this is the reason why We're still talking about what some guy said 2,500 years ago. Another thing that this brings to mind for me is, and Pete and I were talking about this afternoon, is that I have been studying Buddhism for a long time, and I sort of really thought that if I studied it long enough, I'd know. I'd be an expert. And by knowing everything there was to know about Buddhism, maybe I would be enlightened. And it turns out that all that thinking and studying and analyzing is actually an obstacle when it's taken too far. Because the awakening experience is actually physically an experience. We can't get there through our head. We get there through our heart. And so as much as we want to figure it out, and I kind of feel badly that I'm telling you this on the last night, all the studying you've been doing and learning all these new concepts, well, they're really nice to know. And I like to rationalize, I hope it's not too off the track, that we're creating fertile ground. We're shaking things up in our head a bit so that maybe we will experience the world in a slightly different way. But imagine that this awakening experience is a somatic experience. It's a body experience. It's something that happens. It's a direct experience. It's not something you think of. There's not a label or a judgment or an opinion about it. It just is. And so that is the power of these teachings, is to get us to the point where we are willing to at least loosen the conceptual overlay that we have put over ourselves in our entire life and just have the direct experience of being alive. In this moment. You're alive, I think. And we can start to be curious at a very deeper level of what does alive feel like? We hear sounds, and often when we hear sounds, we start to label them. A sound sounds like a car, or sounds like a phone, or sounds like a this or a that. But in this physical experience, the direct experience, instead of labeling, what we're doing is we're exploring the direct experience of hearing. What does it feel like to hear? Doesn't that just blow your mind? So if I just concentrate on fingers tapping on wood, label, 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 label. But if I focus on are you hearing it here in your ear? Or are you hearing it here? What is this experience of hearing? Isn't that amazing? We were talking about bats today. Pete and I have some very odd conversations. And bats are blind. And so they actually make a little sound. They have a little sonar built in. They make a little clicking noise. And through the clicking noise, they can actually see what is all around them. And so this idea that we're so sure what seeing is, what hearing is, what tasting is, what being is, don't be so sure. And have that childlike curiosity about what it feels like to be alive and to start fresh. And so one of the things I thought we would talk about tonight is this idea of the judgments that we make about things that happen in our lives. We've had good things that have happened. We've had bad things that have happened. And we often in the moment make a judgment about whether it is good or bad. And so I thought what we would talk about together is, can everybody think about a time in your life, a pivotal moment, something happened that turned out to change your life in a very big way? Can everybody just think of something? Something, when you think back on your life, you can say, on that day, or in that week, or in that year, I could have gone this way or that way. Something happened, an accident, an illness, a death, whatever. And you can look back and see that it made a difference in the trajectory of your life. Can everybody think of something? Good or bad? Some general nods, okay. So what I'd like you to do is what we always do, is pick one specific event and describe this pivotal moment. And in the moment, whether or not you thought it was good or bad, and now, today, whether or not you would label it as good or bad. So what would you say, anybody want to share, like, what was the gist of the conversation? Chris, Bob's going to be our mic runner. It's kind of like being a Blade Runner. He's just like Mel Gibson, except not.
We were talking about how we had similar experiences and how maybe at the time you didn't think it was that big of a fork in the road, or even if it was a fork in the road, but then down the road you realize, wow, that was a turning point. My story was meeting my wife. I'll be honest, I thought she was just a very attractive young lady at a barbecue my friends and I were having. And then, and I was saying, like, what if my brother wouldn't have brought her over that day? And no, she wasn't dating my brother at the time, but, that was one of the things I was like, what if she would have never come over that day? Little things like that didn't seem like a big deal at the time. And, that was almost a decade ago, and now we've been married for almost 4 years. It's just little things like that.
Yeah, like what a perfect example of where if we put ourselves on automatic and we're not paying attention to what is happening around us, some very beautiful things can be missed. And like the woman you're going to be married to. Anybody else have something similar?
Well, I just had a thought from my experience that I was actually very aware in the moment that it was a pivotal experience, kind of like intuitive. Like I didn't know what it was going to be, good or bad, but in the moment I experienced it, I knew it was a major fork in the road, like significant.
And so how did you handle that? Did you feel alive and aware? Did it feel scary, or?
I was very much at peace with it. It felt like a complete sensation of awakeness, I guess. It's complete awareness.
So are you comfortable sharing with us, giving us a hint as to what it was?
Oh, sure. It wasn't, it was being on a plane and flying over the ocean, middle of nowhere, going to Amsterdam to study abroad in college. And there was just this sensation that I was completely at peace with everything that happened in in my life before, and now everything was going to change completely. And I just had an intuition of how important that moment was. And maybe without having that intuition, it wouldn't have been that important. I made it that important.
That's such a great point. So that because you had that intuition that it was going to change your life, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that, oh, I'm getting off the plane in Amsterdam and my life is about to change. Oh, that's a great example. Perfect, yeah. And I think Keith had something there.
We discussed to a certain extent about how all the decisions ended up being made and all the pivotal things that happened just to get us here now. I mean, she came from Philadelphia, I came from Omaha area, and I mean, in order for us to have this similar experience, that all these pivotal things had to happen to get us, you know, the two of us or the 100 of us or whatever in this room at the same time. And you never really know what a pivotal position is going to be.
You really never, it could be, this could be major tonight. But, you know, it's funny, we were at prison, and one of the things that the inmates was talking about, that what kept them going was hope. And they felt like if they didn't have hope, that they just would fall into deep despair. And so there's a little twist in the Buddhist teachings about giving up hope and fear. And this sounds so horrible that I would want you to give up hope and fear. And there's a little bit of way you can kind of nudge it around and say you can still have aspirations. We aspire to things, but the teaching on hope and fear is that if we constantly live in a state of hope and fear, we're always living in the future. And so when we give up hope and fear, we are able to look at what is happening in this moment that is precious. And so we ended up having a conversation with some men that are never going to get out of prison. And so the idea would be, what in this moment, and it was visceral that I said, you know, this is such a precious moment right now, today, to be sitting in this room with you guys having this conversation. And sometimes I think we are looking for something big. You know, we want that big aha that, oh, suddenly we're going to win the lottery, or something wonderful is going to happen. And yet because of that, we sometimes miss the preciousness of just these little moments of being together. And so it's a miracle. I don't know about you guys, but the fact that I survived my 20s is a miracle. And so here we are, and how precious it is. It may not be perfect, but it is precious if we make it so. Going back to kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, if we start to take each moment as a gift, then it's going to start to feel more like a gift. So that's a good example as well. Anybody else have a different experience? Oh.
Well, I had a pivotal moment when I was 10 years old that I thought was very interesting. I was raised hardcore Jehovah's Witness.
Ooh.
And yeah. So you think about a fear of a God, let me tell you, I was scared to death of him. And at 10 years old, I was at a church convention, and one of the men that was at our church that I saw every 7 times a week, because we went to church 7 times a week, and I said hi to him, and my dad tapped me and said, you can't talk to Brother Mitchell for a year, because he had been disqualified, or all of a sudden I forgot the word.
Shunned?
Yeah, he was shunned, but that's the same thing. And so I was just so confused by that, but I couldn't talk right then because we were having a meeting. And then later when we got home, I asked my dad about it. He said, well, I can't give you the details, but he can't be spoken to for a year. So I thought that was the weirdest thing in my heart. I remember just thinking about it, and how weird that was. It was like, you know, gosh, when someone falls down, aren't you supposed to help them up? I mean, you don't just leave them on the sidewalk. And I just remember thinking that very thought when I was 10 years old, that this isn't going to work for me in life. And that, to me, was a huge pivot. And so I went ahead and went, because I had to. But as soon as I was 17, I left home. And believe me, I'm from a whole big family, 143 people. My grandmother had 13 children. So, and they're all Jehovah's Witnesses, and all their kids are Jehovah's Witnesses, and all my aunts and uncles and cousins, and everybody's a Jehovah's Witness. And so I get a lot of pressure to this day about not being a Jehovah's Witness anymore. But, you know, I just knew that it wasn't for me. So that was my pivotal moment. Then after I got out of there, I had to start church hopping until I could find a place that I felt that spoke to my heart. And I ended up at Unity, like, I don't know, 20 years ago or something. And that got me on my place where I felt, you know, good again.
And how grateful, this is going to seem very odd, how grateful to Mr. Mitchell.
Yes, Brother Mitchell, thank you.
That we never know. Something is horrible. Who knows what happened in his life?
Yes, I don't know, you know, what he did. I don't know what got him, you know. Gosh, I can't think of the word. But it is shunned. Yeah, it is that same thing where you can't speak to them for a year. And no one, you can speak to their family, but you can't speak to that one person. So,
such a great example of where something really awful can happen, but it can still have a positive impact.
Yeah.
And it brought you to your spiritual home.
It did.
Yeah, that's a great example. Maybe one more, and then we're going to do a little exercise. I watched the Saturday Night Live special.
I'll pitch you softball. The most pivotal moment of my life came at its darkest hour. And that was about 5.5 years ago. I found myself at the end of a relationship, someone who was incredibly precious to me. But that was no more, and I couldn't do anything about it. Addictive personality that I am, I had no alternative. I could not make myself feel the way I wanted to feel. I found myself marking time with the knowledge that there were worse things that I could do than to fall back into my addictive behavior. A good friend of mine was keeping an eye on things. God bless Tom Weinstraw. And I didn't particularly care, but he said, let's go down to the Ringmain Center. They're doing an introduction to meditation down there. And I really can't tell you what the lady said. I was just filling time. But what I do remember of that pivotal moment was that I was lost, alone, hurting, and desperate, and anything else. And as she began to speak, it's as though she had a script to what was going on inside of me as far as feelings were concerned. I don't remember her talking about meditation. But what I do remember her saying to me was, suppose I told you that for this time, you can be away from those feelings. If you'll try, I'll show you how. That was my pivotal moment. The following week, I felt bad when I went home. The following Sunday, I was here with you, actually, in this room. I went down to the hall and went home. Felt bad. The following week, I came back, talked to you. Thereby hangs the tale. My pivotal moment.
You know, someone told me when I was telling them about my issue with the word God, they said in AA, if you don't like the way people normally describe God, you can just call it the gift of desperation. And I thought that was really precious, that sometimes we have to be so desperate that we're willing to try anything other than what we've been doing. That's a good example as well. So we have just enough time. I wanted to do just a little experiential thing so that we experience this idea of not self. So if you want to just take a moment and we'll close our eyes. Settle back down into our body. And we're just going to use all our senses to have this experience of getting to this exploration of not self. And so we can begin by being very specifically aware of whatever sensations are arising in your body. You might start with your feet and your legs. Your hands and your arms. Having this sense of playfulness and curiosity about what are these sensations? Directly experiencing them. When we sit so still, sometimes we can be aware of that very subtle sensation of the blood as it flows through the veins. With curiosity and compassion and awareness. Right here, right now, the direct experience. And then we might shift our awareness to hearing. And once again, just having that direct experience, not labeling the sounds themselves, but curious about the experience, the feeling of hearing. Then shifting awareness to the experience of thinking. Instead of focusing on the content of the thoughts themselves. Just explore this experience, what it feels like to think. What exactly is thinking? Finding that underlying awareness. simply loosening up any attachment to a sense of a solid, separate, permanent self. Instead, focusing on the flow, the fluidity. Not solid, not separate, not permanent, not self. And we'll close by just simply opening your eyes and see if you can take with you that curiosity about playing with the idea of not solid, not separate, not permanent, not self. So just to finish up this last lesson, it's a practice that we can do. You know, it's so portable. You can do it any place, and nobody even has to know. You can just be aware of your sensations as judgments come up, as those stories that we start to tell ourselves. We can just be a little curious and not quite so sure. And, see what happens. So we're just about ready for any last questions, and then if for anybody who wants to stay for the refuge vows, we'll finish that up as well. Any last questions before we wrap her up after 6 weeks of all this good study?
Earlier you were talking about how to essentially give up hope but still have aspirations. And one of the things that I'm curious about is when you look at medicine or science or technology, people aspiring for something bigger and better, there's been so much good that's been able to come as a result of that. How can you individually still be able to stay in the present and be okay just the way you are while still having that drive and ambition to aspire?
I think that the distinction between hope and aspiration is simply expectation. So it is that we sort of get this idea that things are going to happen in a certain way, and we have the goals and ambitions, but we let go of the expectation about how things are going to unfold. You know, a perfect example is the way that Post-it notes were discovered. You know, just sort of like this thing where they were trying to find a glue, and the glue didn't really work very well. And through the experimentation process, they found another application, and now we have glue that doesn't work very well. We call it Post-it notes. So I think from an ambition, it's not about, the ambition is wanting to be better, but we also let go of expecting it to be in a certain way. And that's what I have found one of these practices have been so powerful, is that amazing, seemingly miraculous things happen, and it's even better than I could have ever imagined. So I just try to do the very best I can in this moment, and I find that I'm just drawn to certain passions, and I work hard because of the love of it, not because it's I want to finish it. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think it's like what you were talking about a couple classes ago, to where it's okay to have a nice house or a nice car or want nice things, as long as you separate the attachment from it. That if you don't have it, then you're sad or you're suffering or you're dissatisfied. So it's okay to want bigger or better things for yourself. Absolutely. As long as you don't let that define your happiness.
That's such a great example, because it's almost as if the happier you are and the more passionate you are about whatever you're doing and the more fully present you are, the more opportunities that are going to come your way. And you may have this idea, oh, I'm only going to be able to get this house I want if I do it this way. And then when you open yourself up to all the possibilities, there are all sorts of potentials that you may not even have explored. And that's just been my experience about this opening up to the present moment. It's not about doing nothing. It's about realizing how many alternatives we have in order to be happy. So yeah, feel free, go buy a big house. That's totally okay. And you can still call yourself a good Buddhist. But just don't be attached to it when it burns down. Any last questions?
Yeah, I'll follow that. It reminds me of when I heard this conversation for the first time, my brain was kind of liquefying in my head.
It reminded me of, and I'm sure there are some scientific people in this room that could describe it a lot better, but the whole idea of positing a theorem and then testing it. A lot of scientific people have an idea of what they think is going to happen, and they set up an experiment to test it, and they're kind of equally excited whether what they thought was going to happen happens or doesn't. Because if it doesn't, it opens up all of these opportunities of different ways to go, and a lot of the many really big discoveries have occurred because the thing I thought was going to happen didn't.
Sure.
And if they're not open-minded enough to see, the tendency would be to be disappointed because my theory didn't work out. Well, hold on. If you're open-minded enough to see all the other things that did happen and recognize them for the potential they have and chase that, that's kind of the way science moves forward. And so when I first heard that, I'm like, that is kind of that testing a theorem, but being open to the results, whatever they are, idea.
That's a perfect example. And in fact, I think in science there is the hypothesis bias, where sometimes scientists, they want their hypothesis to be true so badly that they kind of...
Or they want to get published, so they...
Yes, that whole thing about wanting to be published or perish. So that's a whole other topic that we could have a whole class on. Last questions? No? Well, first of all, thank you guys for spending 6 weeks with me. This is awesome. They've been filmed, so we have podcasts, we have videos, we have handouts, and I just really am grateful. You've just been so engaged, and I want to get to know each of you better. It's just such a joy to get to be with you and have these kind of conversations and let me say wacky things and you don't run out of the room screaming. I consider the class to be a success just for that reason
So just a couple of announcements and then we'll finish up. We are going to chant at the Nelson. We'll do chanting and meditation this Thursday at 7 o'clock. So if you'd like to do that, feel free to send me an email. We've got room left. And then Bob wants to know that there's a chat and chew. What do you do? Watch and talk. And they're going to do something. I don't know. There's probably some chewing going on too.
We watch teachers from throughout the world, teachers and authors who do wonderful YouTube podcasts or Vajra TV or things like that, and teach us on certain lessons. And we watch them and learn from them, and then we have discussion.
And that'll be in the Heritage Room at 6:30.
Heritage Room on Thursday. It's the first and third Thursdays of the month.
Is that this Thursday?
That's this Thursday.
Okay.
And we'll be watching Rick Hansen, who wrote Rewiring
The Buddhist Brain.
The Buddhist Brain and Rewiring the Brain for Happiness.
Yeah. And then Saturday night we're going to have a Buddhist movie, and I have a DVD that I am going to watch. So stay tuned. If you get the e-news, be surprised. It'll be wonderful. Come on Saturday. And so, as always, there's Donna Tubbs at the back, and your generosity is really what makes this possible. We are a thriving Buddhist community because you're willing to give as you feel comfortable. So thank you for doing that. And so we're going to end, as we always do, is just taking a moment to think about all beings, no matter where they are, no matter who they are, that they have the same wants and needs that we do. They want to feel loved and cared for. And so we can just have this moment to feel that sense of connection with them and to truly wish for them to be free from suffering and to be happy. And so if you'd like to join me on one of your pages, there'll be the bodhicitta dedication that we could say 3 times. May the pure, brilliant sun of bodhicitta dawn in each and every heart and mind, dispelling the darkness of suffering and confusion, unstoppably until all are illumined and awakened. May the pure, brilliant sun of bodhicitta dawn in each and every heart and mind, dispelling the darkness of suffering and confusion, unstoppably until all are illumined and awakened. May the pure, brilliant sun of bodhicitta dawn in each and every heart and mind, dispelling the darkness of suffering and confusion, unstoppably until all are illumined and awakened. Body, speech, and mind in perfect mind.